somewhere in occupied Europe, during the last summer of the Second World War, a German signals officer stared at 3 versions of the same truth and knew that one of them had to be lying. His receiving room was almost completely dark except for the soft glow of radio dials. One by one, the signals arrived. Each flying bomb crossing the English Channel carried a tiny radio transmitter. Until the moment it crashed, it continued whispering its position back across the water. Every time one of those signals disappeared, another pin was pushed into a map spread across the table. Night after night, the pattern repeated itself. The bombs were falling short. Not a little short. Consistently short. South of central London. Yet stacked beside his equipment were intelligence reports from Germany's most trusted agents inside Britain. Those reports insisted the exact opposite. The bombs were overshooting. Berlin spies claimed they were sailing beyond central London into the northwestern suburbs. 2 systems. He checked calculations. Nothing appeared wrong. The radios never changed their story. Neither did the spies. The terrible irony was that neither the rockets nor the radios were failing. The failure had begun years before the first flying bomb ever left its launch ramp. To understand why Germany's revenge campaign slowly drifted away from its target, you have to rewind to a machine that worked almost perfectly unto an intelligence war Britain had already won before most Germans realized it had begun. Only 1 week after Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, another battle opened over the English Channel. This one had no pilots, no dogfights, no dramatic formations, only a strange mechanical buzzing that announced death long before anyone could see it. Officially it was designated the VS Eller Phi 103. History would remember it as the V1. To civilians, it became something even more unforgettable. Children learned to count the rhythm of its pulse jet engine. Parents learned something even worse. As long as the engine buzzed, there was still time. When the buzzing stopped, everyone held their breath, because silence meant the bomb had begun its final dive. It was one of the first practical cruise missiles in history. Just over 8 meters long, carrying nearly 850 kilograms of high explosive, the V-1 was astonishingly sophisticated for its era. Inside its steel body, spinning gyroscopes kept it level. A magnetic compass held its course. A barometric device maintained altitude. On its nose, a tiny propeller counted distance through the air until it reached a preset number of revolutions. No pilot, no return flight, no fear, only mathematics. The pulse-minus jet mounted above the fuselage gave the weapon its unforgettable voice. Air rushed through spring-minus loaded shutters. Fuel ignited. Pressure slammed the shutters shut. Exhaust blasted from the rear. 40-5 times every second the cycle repeated, producing the harsh mechanical stutter that echoed across southern England. To many British civilians, that sound became the soundtrack of the summer. To German engine ears, it sounded like progress. To Colonel Max Wachtel, commander of Flak Regiment 155W, it sounded like revenge. His launch ramps stretched across northern France, concrete structures angled toward England. Every crew had rehearsed for months. Guidance settings, launch calculations, final checks. Once released, the bomb needed nothing more from the men who fired it. More than 10,000 V-1s would eventually leave those ramps for Britain. Wachtel believed he was conducting a modern form of artillery. Fire, observe. Fire again. That principle had guided armies for generations. No gun crew expected its first salvo to land perfectly. Spotters watched where shells struck, reported the error, and batteries adjusted accordingly. The V-1 campaign followed exactly the same logic. Only the observers stood hundreds of kilometers away. Inside Britain, Germany believed it possessed an active network of intelligence agents scattered across England. These men transmitted reports by secret radio. They described bomb damage, estimated impact locations, and helped Berlin adjust each new wave of attacks. From Wachtel's perspective, the system was flawless. He had engineers building the weapons, signals officers monitoring their transmissions, agents watching the results. Every correction should make the next attack more accurate. Nothing about that reasoning was foolish. It was disciplined. Entirely logical. It rested on only one assumption: that the men sending those reports still worked for Germany. They did not. Britain's answer to the V-1 offensive appeared dramatic enough. Tempest fighters screamed across Kent at nearly 450 miles per hour, chasing pilotless bombs only a little slower than themselves. Radar stations plotted every incoming weapon. Searchlights swept the night sky. Heavy anti-minus aircraft batteries lined the coast. Those were the defenses everyone could see. Long before the first V-1 crossed the Channel, British counterintelligence had quietly dismantled Germany's espionage network inside the United Kingdom. Every agent who landed by parachute, every radio operator Berlin believed was gathering priceless intelligence. One after another, they had been arrested. Some disappeared into prison. Some were executed. Others received a different offer. Keep transmitting, but transmit exactly what Britain wanted Germany to hear. The operation became one of the greatest intelligence achievements of the war. Its administrators gave it an almost playful name: XX Double Cross. The title captured the entire strategy. Germany believed it possessed spies. Britain possessed actors. Each message crossing the airwaves seemed authentic because it came from familiar call signs, familiar operators, familiar personalities. Nothing appeared forced. Nothing appeared suspicious. The deception worked because it never tried to look like deception. Among all these double agents, none proved more valuable than a quiet Spaniard named Juan Pujol Garcia. The British called him Garbo, not because he was glamorous, but because his performance deserved an award. With MI5 officer Thomas Harris, Garbo constructed imaginary intelligence empire. 27 fictional sub-agents. Different professions, different personalities, different locations across Britain. Some supposedly worked at ports, others at railway stations. Military offices. Every one of them existed only on paper. Berlin adored them. Reports arrived filled with convincing details, small mistakes, harmless gossip, observations too trivial to invent unless they were real. The Germans saw authenticity. The British saw theater. By the time the V-1 offensive began, Germany's greatest force inside Britain consisted of one loyal volunteer, one British intelligence officer, and a filing cabinet full of imaginary people. No German commander suspected the truth. Why would they? Every previous report had appeared reliable. Every correction seemed reasonable. Trust had accumulated slowly over years, which made it almost impossible to question when the most important campaign of the war finally arrived. That was the battlefield the German signals officer could never see. His instruments reported one reality. He believed the spies because he had spent years learning they deserved belief. He had no reason to imagine that Britain's greatest weapon against the V-1 was not a fighter aircraft, or a radar set, or an anti-aircraft gun. It was trust itself, and Britain already controlled it. The deception alone could not save London. If every false report had reached Berlin, but every flying bomb had been allowed to continue unchallenged, thousands more would have reached the capital. Britain still needed men willing to meet a pilotless weapon at nearly 400 miles an hour, often just a few hundred feet above the ground. That responsibility fell to Operation Ivor. Across southern England, fighter squadrons abandoned familiar routines and learned an entirely new kind of combat. Chasing another airplane meant predicting a pilot's decisions. Chasing a V-1 meant outrunning mathematics itself. The finest aircraft for the job proved to be the Hawker Tempest. Fast at low altitude and brutally stable, it could just barely overtake the flying bombs before they reached London. Even then, the margin was frighteningly small. A pilot had only seconds to close the distance, line up the shot, and fire before the missile disappeared inland. Shooting carried its own danger. The Tempest's 420mm cannon could detonate the V-1's enormous warhead instantly. More than one pilot destroyed his target only to fly directly into the explosion, disappearing inside the same fireball he had created. Wing Commander Roland Beaumont searched for safer answers. A meticulous pilot as much engineer as warrior, Beaumont ordered his squadrons to harmonize their guns so the streams of shells converged at a greater distance. Yet one of the campaign's most remarkable discoveries required no bullets at all. A pilot eased alongside a flying bomb until the tips of their wings were separated by only inches. He never touched it. Instead, he slipped beneath the missile's wing just closely enough that the disturbed airflow upset its balance. The missile flipped over, entered an unrecoverable dive, and smashed harmlessly into open countryside. An advanced weapon worth thousands of Reichsmarks had been defeated by nothing more than invisible air. While fighters battled overhead, another revolution unfolded along the coast. Britain moved hundreds of heavy anti-minus aircraft guns away from London itself and concentrated them where the bombs first crossed land. Radar automatically tracked each incoming missile. Mechanical predictors calculated firing solutions almost instantly. New proximity fuses exploded shells when they passed close enough, removing the need for a direct hit. The improvement bordered on astonishing. Early in the campaign, thousands of shells might be required to destroy a single V1. By late summer, barely 100 rounds often accomplished the same result. Behind the guns floated nearly 2,000 barrage balloons, their steel cables forming another obstacle for anything that slipped through the fighters. Layer by layer, Britain's defenses tightened. Yet even this impressive system could not explain the pattern that continued to trouble the German signals officer. Berlin's agents still insisted they were flying too far. Inside London's intelligence offices, however, there was no contradiction at all. British planners understood something the Germans never considered. Every correction Watchell ordered depended entirely upon reports coming from agents Britain already controlled. The Germans wanted to walk their bombardment towards central London. Britain quietly walked it away, instead. Whenever the transmitters showed impacts falling south of the city, the double agents calmly reported the opposite. Berlin responded exactly as any competent artillery commander would. It shortened the range. Each adjustment pulled the average point of impact farther away from central London and deeper into less densely populated districts south of the capital. The deception was elegant because it never asked Germany to ignore evidence. It merely asked Germany to believe the wrong evidence. The transmitters were dismissed as unreliable. Once that decision had been made, every correction only increased the error. The strategy carried a terrible moral burden. Officials inside Britain understood that redirecting the bombardment meant real neighborhoods would absorb explosions that otherwise might have fallen elsewhere. The debate inside government was fierce. Some argued no one possessed the right to choose which communities faced greater danger. Others answered with equally grim arithmetic. Allowing the bombs to drift naturally toward the heart of London promised even greater loss of life. Only different kinds of tragedy. In the end, the deception continued. By August 1944, nearly 4 out of every 5 V1s aimed at Britain were destroyed before reaching London. Those that survived increasingly struck places Germany had never intended to target. Then history overtook technology. After breaking out of Normandy, Allied armies surged across northern France with astonishing speed. One after another, the launch sites in the Pas-de-Calais disappeared beneath advancing British and Canadian troops. The concrete ramps that had promised Hitler's revenge suddenly belonged to the enemy. The campaign collapsed not because the V1 had stopped working, but because its launching grounds had been conquered. When the final figures were counted, Germany had launched more than 10,000 flying bombs toward Britain. Only about 2,400 reached the London area. Thousands had been destroyed by fighters, others by anti-minus aircraft guns, others by barrage balloons. Many simply crashed before reaching their intended objective. Still, the human cost remained devastating. More than 6,000 people were killed in the London region alone. No deception erased that suffering. No technological triumph made those families whole again. The campaign ended as a reminder that victory in war is often measured not by preventing tragedy, but by limiting it. The German engineers had built an extraordinary machine. Their calculations were largely correct. Their guidance systems functioned. Their pulse-minus jets performed exactly as designed. The flaw was never inside the weapon. It existed inside an assumption no engineer could measure. Germany believed it possessed trustworthy eyes inside Britain. Britain had been looking through those eyes for years. That is why the German signals officer never found the answer by checking antennas or transmitters. The radios were telling him the truth all along. The bombs really were falling short. What deceived him was something no instrument could detect. The quiet voice of a trusted friend, who had changed sides long before the first flying bomb ever left its ramp. In the end, the V1 campaign proved one of history's most enduring lessons. Technology can extend a nation's reach. Machines can fly without pilots. But the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is often neither explosive nor mechanical. It is information. Because whoever controls what the enemy believes, ultimately controls where the enemy aims.